Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We are so excited to have you all here with us. My name is Malea McMurray, and I'm currently serving as president of IGNITE at UTEP. IGNITE was founded by, she's actually here today, Raneem, and she's currently serving as our executive advisor. And we're so excited to have Vera with us today and honored to have her. So let's get started. We also are featuring an organization called the El Paso League of Women Voters, and I just want to introduce the president who is here with us today, Ms. Carol Wallace. So I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you, Malea. Thank you for inviting us. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Carol Wallace, and I am the president of the League of Women Voters of El Paso. And I see Raneem is here. And Raneem last year, along with Audrey Perez, both were our received, or 2 years ago, before last year we didn't have a Bravo Awards, but were our young people's Bravo Award winners. And so we want to continue in that tradition. And we look forward to having young people because there's a lot of gray people there, although you can't see my grays too much, but because I spray. But anyway, we want to carry on the tradition of advocacy in our organization, and we want it to be a vibrant organization. So please, please join us. We have student memberships. They're only, I believe, $5 a year. And then after that, one of our vice presidents, Perla Galindo, who is no longer with us because she took a job in Seattle for the immigration advocacy group, Brennet. But she started off as a student member and then became, a year later, she joined as a full member and then became our vice president in charge of programs. So see, you all can, we know that you all can make a difference. Let me tell you a little bit about the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters was founded over 101 years ago, and El Paso is one of the founding members of the League of Women Voters nationally. We're the 6th oldest in the country and in Texas. So Texas had the idea that women were at the forefront of doing things. So our main goals are, we're a nonpartisan group that doesn't support candidates or parties. So it makes me sad, although I do support candidates individually, I cannot, as the president, endorse anyone. And so that's, but we do that because we also do things like forums for candidates. And we had last year, even during the pandemic, the Alamo Draft House, we had the mayor's forum and the El Paso City Reps. And I see Veronica here, so I'm going to stick around and listen to Veronica because she's A1. So,
Thank you.
we do not endorse candidates or parties, but we do advocate for issues like women's rights, health rights, immigration rights, all the things that you all believe in are things that I think that you believe in, are the things that we endorse. And if you'd like to, you can go to our webpage, which is going to be updated very soon. And you can see what the League of Women Voters endorses nationally and in Texas. And by the way, the El Paso League was at the forefront of endorsing, of doing advocacy work for fair maps. And Judy Ackerman, who I see here, is our fair maps queen because she does so much for making sure that we redistrict the maps fairly. And you know that it's based on the census. So if any of you would like to give testimony, and I can, Judy can go ahead and put that in the chat. It'd be wonderful to have some of you young people advocate for redistricting, because we want everybody's vote to be counted. One voice, one vote. And we want to make sure that we aren't gerrymandered, because this is how we lose our power, is by giving it away. And as a matter of fact, in redistricting, this is what has been done. So we advocate for all sorts of things. Last year or 2 years ago, we received a commendation from both the county government and the city government for our 100th anniversary. So this year we were going to celebrate last year the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. So if we're allowed to, we'll do it this year. If not, we'll do it next year for the Bravos. So but we want to invite you all to become members. You can be student members, and then when you graduate, you can become stay with us, and you can become full members. But you will still have the same voice as a student as anyone else, and your vote will count. All right.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wallace. We really appreciate you being here with us today. And thank you so much, Judy. She is one of their members as well, and she's putting a lot of really great resources and information in the chat as well. So thank you so much, everyone. Okay, well, I will go ahead and introduce our moderators for this session. First off, we have Vanessa, who is our marketing director. And then we also have her, we have Stephanie, who is our treasurer, and they are going to be introducing Vero. So I will hand it off to them.
Thank you, Malea. So I am Vanessa Galvez. I am a junior at UTEP. I am the marketing director for IGNITE, and I'm happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Soto. I am a first-generation student at UTEP with a major in political science and a minor in criminal justice, and I am IGNITE's treasurer. So now to introduce our guest speaker, Veronica Carbajal. So Veronica is a fourth-generation fronteriza raised in both El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. She graduated from Burgess High School and Brown University in 1998 with a degree in environmental studies and an honors thesis entitled Chicanas and Environmental Justice, which focused on a recycling facility in a racially segregated part of Austin. Afterwards, Vero came home and did air polluting outreach. At the time, local leaders blamed individuals instead of our local polluting giants. This motivated Vero to go to law school. She put herself through the University of Texas School of Law by working on environmental taxes tort cases for a private law firm. Now Vero has been an attorney at the Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid Inc. since graduating in 2004. She defended the rights of working poor people with disabilities, people on fixed incomes, and people who have slipped into poverty due to illnesses, the economic recession, natural disasters, and the mass shooting in 2019, and most recently, the pandemic. She has taken on polluters like Asarco and the El Paso Electric real estate scammers, slumlords, and even the city of El Paso over its treatment of natural disaster victims, housing discrimination, and its plans to build a sports arena in Duranguito, a historic neighborhood with low-income elderly residents. Vero has also collaborated with the city and most recently helped develop its COVID-19 housing assistance program. Vero has been involved with a number of nonprofit organizations and is also a children's book author. She ran for mayor of the city of El Paso in November of 2020. So Ms. Vero, the floor is yours.
Thank you everyone for having me. I'm just in awe of all the work that you're doing. I want to thank Carol and Judy for all of the work that they do day in and day out. And I really encourage you to get involved with the League of Women Voters and also to pay attention to the bills at the state legislature, as well as hopefully some things that might happen when it comes to voting rights at the state and federal level, and also in terms of campaign finance reform. Those issues are really important to securing not only our vote, but securing our democracy.
Thank you, Vero. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the interview question. the interview portion of this questionnaire. So to get started, Vero, if you could go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Well, I grew up in both El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. If some of you know my personal story, you know that my great-grandparents met in the Chamizal neighborhood about 100 years ago in the early 1920s. And my great-grandfather was working for the railroad. He was a farm worker initially when he immigrated, and he was undocumented. And the railroad back then would help people access a green card. And so a friend who happened to know him from Aguascalientes, who happened to run into him, said, you need to leave the fields. If you start as a farm worker, you're going to stay as a farm worker, and you won't ever be able to adjust your status. And so he had education, and so he was able to get hired as a mechanic on the railroad. But based on what I've found at the library, if you have family that's lived in El Paso for a while, the library has a really beautiful heritage section, and they have old phone books. And so I found my great-grandparents in those phone books. And based on that, I can tell that they moved from one tenement to another. Most of those are now gone. So to make a long story short, my great-grandparents wanted to buy a house for their children, and they could not do that here because of their income and also because of redlining. They could not access financing to live in a home that was decent. And so they went to Juarez, and because they now had green cards, they could come and go as they pleased. So they bought a house in Juarez, and my great-grandfather commuted to El Paso for 40 years. My grandfather did the same thing, my mom did the same thing, and then I did the same thing. All of them were low-wage workers, but because we were all, we had a way to commute to the US, we were able to do that. I went to public school, which was not legal. Mexican residents have to pay for public school or attend private school. And so that was a hardship for us, having to lie and having to make sure I didn't get caught, because then I knew that I would lose my education. That said, I grew up with a lot of privilege, and I try to talk about it because our culture isn't really comfortable talking about a lot of things, including the fact that many of us are very privileged. And the more we talk about that, the more we can demystify the idea that this country is one where you can go from rags to riches. We all know that that's nearly impossible for most of us, and that most people, like my family, it took us 4 generations for someone like me to go to college and to be able to access so many more opportunities than other people. So that is a long answer to who I am, but I'm very proud of being from El Paso and from Juarez. And I hoped that throughout the campaign, my pride in my community was showcased, from our logo to our messaging to the reach that we had.
Thank you. Now moving on to the next question. Where did you attend college, and what did you major in?
I went to Brown University, which is in Providence, Rhode Island. Brown is an Ivy League. I was lucky enough to have, I was raised by a single mom, and my mom was very supportive of my education. And a lot of things just kind of fell into place in order for me to get to Brown. One of them was that I had a really good high school counselor who motivated me, and she asked me what I wanted to study. So at the time, this was in the early 1990s, I said environmental studies. And the reason for that was that my grandparents instilled in me a love of nature, but they also died very young from cancer. And so I knew that for me, the environment would always be about our natural spaces, but also about the fact that when our planet is poisoned, we know that, sooner or later, our bodies are also poisoned. And so Brown at the time had a very good recruiting team, and they came to El Paso, and I met with them and I applied, and I was able to get in. And then, as you said earlier, I came home and did some work, and I realized that I wanted to access power. And so the way I thought I could do that was by going to law school. So I ended up going to UT Austin, and I took a lot of environmental classes, did environmental torts while I was there, and then started working for legal aid right after that.
Oh, wow, that's such a great story. And what led you to politics? Was there a specific experience?
You know, I think my interest in running for office probably dates back to 2006, but it wasn't a desire as much as that was really the first time I recognized the importance of elected officials at the local level. So in 2006, a number of things happened. One was that we had the flooding, and a lot of you are really young, so I think you may not remember, but in late August of 2006, El Paso experienced severe flooding. And I had been in San Antonio with legal aid for a year before that. So I saw Hurricane Katrina, and we helped the evacuees. We were almost evacuated ourselves. And so I knew the FEMA process. I knew what local governments can do in those situations, as well as state and federal governments. So when we had the flooding in El Paso, there were a couple of neighborhoods that were really hard hit. And I understood the process, right? So our paralegals went and did outreach. We were getting ready to do FEMA applications and appeals and all of these things. And then the city showed up 2 weeks later and said, no, you need to stop repairing and applying for money because we're going to buy you out. And it's going to be voluntary, but we're going to turn off all of your utilities. So it's really not voluntary, right? You can live here, but you won't be able to access electricity or gas or water. So we brought a lawsuit. But that was really my first encounter with the city of El Paso, where I realized how disengaged a lot of administrators are from people. So in the beginning, they said, we're going to give you $35,000, and that's a lot of money for you, so you can go buy a new house. This was in 2006, but even then, there is no way you could buy a replacement home for that. And so there was so much, I felt, implicit racism. This community is in the Upper Valley. The city representative, I think, was very disconnected. When she went to meetings at the community, she would take people with her like bodyguards because she was afraid of the residents, even though there had never been any, any indication that they would be violent against her. And it was primarily 100% Mexican-American community. And so, and the city would show up without translators. There were a lot of little things that were done that were really meant to, whether intentional or not, I think they had these discriminatory outcomes. So that was my first introduction to the city's disengagement with community. But then we also started to get organized around these issues in Segundo Barrio, where the city, including people who call themselves progressives, were trying to implement the downtown plan that was really about demolishing the barrios, starting with Segundo Barrio, and replacing them with affluent businesses and affluent housing. And so again, I was introduced to the city and the way that they wanted to impose a lot of ideals and plans on people that really didn't have a lot of options. And the sale, as it was in Moab and as it was in Segundo, was always like, but this is a dump. You live in a community that's so run down. Don't you want to live somewhere better? And so it was very patronizing. It was also very insulting, and it was very ignorant of the fact that the city had played a large role in those communities being deteriorated, right? So it's like, I started to see that, okay, so here's what the game plan is. You start to neglect a community, so then later on, you can justify removing people, displacing people, and erasing their buildings and history because it's not worth saving, right? Because you let it fall apart. So that's really, I started to, the fire was lit a very long time ago, but I still believed that I could fight through the court system and that we could do all sorts of things to help people fight back. And then with the fight in Duranguito, I realized that that's a huge gamble, right? With Duranguito, we have fought legally for over 4 years, and we have lost. We've lost before the Supreme Court of Texas, right? And those are elected officials as well, and they're all conservative. And so I had been asked years ago to run for office, and I'd already said no because I really do love the work that I do in many ways. And I realized that I couldn't put it off anymore. this is becoming very, very crucial. And so this was a time for me to run to finally leave my practice and try something different. I do believe that the court system is a place where we can try to find justice, but good leaders, good elected leaders should not be sued. They should be acting in accordance with democratic values and with justice in mind. And so that's why I think more and more of us need to be running for all sorts of offices so that we don't have to litigate these issues, because they don't even have to be raised as issues. They just are implemented in day-to-day policies and practices by our elected officials.
That's really inspiring hearing your story and how you got started. Many young local people look up to you, so that's really inspiring. Thank you for that. And our next question is, did you ever feel as though you struggled with self-confidence as it relates to beginning your political career? If so, how did you overcome that?
Yes, definitely. I think, I mean, it goes back to really my practice, right? So I am a lawyer. I do have a combination of duties, but I do have cases that go to court. And so I'm very comfortable now going into a courtroom. I prepare, I mean, I over prepare. I would rather not sleep, but just, just make sure that I know exactly where things are going to be and that my client is prepared. And so I am not naturally extroverted. I am not naturally, I'm not naturally a great speaker. It takes a lot of practice. And that said, when I go into court, I remain very focused, and I think I'm pretty good at now at commanding attention. When it came to the race, though, it's very daunting. And I think a lot, people say that women should be able to lean in, but I think for a lot of us, we have to be pushed in. It's not just simply like, oh, I'm just kind of like considering running. I mean, someone has to literally push you in and say, you can do this. And when it came to the city position, it is really, I mean, if you're going to take the mayor's position seriously, there are so many issues that come at you all of the time in a good year. In a bad year, you're dealing with really catastrophic things, right? Like the pandemic, or like the mass shooting, or like the immigration, policies of the federal government that you have no control over. And so people, I think, like me, who are self-aware, tend to shy away from that because it seems so daunting. And so often, though, we see elected officials who clearly are not prepared, who are not qualified, but they have the self-confidence. And that, I think, we need to flip that on its head, because people who may come across as very prepared and very well-spoken and they have an answer for everything might, in fact, not be the best people. And that's why I think what I love about your generation is the fact that you ask people for their receipts. You want to know that you can trust someone based on what they've done, not just simply on what they're telling you that they're going to do. And so I had to constantly remind myself of that, okay, it's okay if I don't know all the answers. It's okay if I'm not 100% ready to answer this one question, because, I'm smart and I've done the work. And also, I've never done the work by myself. I've always been a part of a team. And so recognizing that as well is important, because so often, whether it's a candidate or an elected official, you just see them speaking, right? You don't see the person who helped do the research, or the person who's handling the phone calls, or the person who is sometimes even writing their speeches. So we assume that they're the ones doing it all, but it's not. And that's also what I want to demystify, is the fact that when you're running, it takes a team on your campaign. And also when you get elected, and whatever position that you do, you should be able to play nice and to be good to your staff, and to listen to your staff as well as your constituents, and create a culture of collaboration instead of competition with people, right? Because I would hope that when you're in office, you look to your staff as being the people who might follow you, who might follow in your footsteps. And that's certainly what I do at work, is that I have been mentored by amazing people. And my role is to in turn mentor the people that I supervise, because I want them to do the things now and also to take over whenever I leave. So that would be, that's sort of that, you know, that's what I would say about self-confidence. It's something that I think is, you know, one of the things that really changed my practice in the courtroom was when I started to, I had like a mantra, and my mantra was, it's not about me. So when I really started to think about, like, it's not about me, it doesn't matter what I look like, what I sound like, as long as I focus on my goal, and my goal is to help someone access justice, that's what matters. And that kind of, like, that monkey on my back about sounding perfect and sounding older and sounding more experienced kind of just took off and left, because now I could just focus on my goal. And the goal is, you know, doing the best job I can for my client. When we're in court, you know, I tell people I supervise, don't worry about the judge even, or about the jury, worry about the record. Is a court reporter getting everything that you need to say? Speak clearly, speak slowly, but also make sure that you get everything that you need in, because if we have to appeal, the record is going to be gold. So that also kind of lets you, like, relax a little bit when you're doing anything, when you start to think about, it's not about me, it's about the cause, it's about my clients. It takes the pressure off. And I think sometimes that's the best, that gives way to a lot of what we think of as confidence. Because it just takes off the ego, it takes off that burden that you have about being perfect, because no one is perfect, and it distracts you sometimes from what the goal is, which is hopefully to help other people.
Thank you. And was there ever a woman who mentored you and helped you realize your role in public service?
So many women, so many women. My campaign, the people that were closest in the beginning to my campaign were Carmen Rodriguez, Dr. Kathy Stout, and my incredible campaign treasurer, Kitty Spalding. And then there were others, like Judy Ackerman was so involved, Beatriz Vera, Marilyn Guida, so many, Ana Reza, so many women and men too, but man, the women were really, really helpful. Carmen Rodriguez was one of our branch managers at Legal Aid when I first moved back to El Paso. And she's my mentor in a lot of different ways. We've co-counseled, we've done a lot of really great things. We took on the city with the Segundo Barrio issues, and then with the flooding issues. But she also ran for mayor. She ran for mayor of the city of El Paso in 2005. And she did not make it into the runoff. And that was a race involving John Cook and Jim Wardy. And she went through a lot. She went through a lot of the same issues. And so when she had been asking me to run, and I was like, oh, I don't know, you know, but she had been there. She understood how hard it was. She understood the sexism, like the machismo that's still there. She understood the power structure, because she had to face that as well. And her husband is recently retired Senator Jose Rodriguez. And so Jose and her have been incredible mentors, but I really do have a sisterhood with Carmen, because she shared so many lessons with me, and also got into the political trenches with me, and was, you know, helping me plan day to day what we needed to do. So I credit her with a lot of the work that I do. She's an incredible lawyer. She litigated against the federal government right after NAFTA passed, because a lot of garment workers were displaced when we had the international treaty with Mexico and Canada. And so these women now had no jobs, and it was very hard for them to find employment. So the government was supposed to train them into transitional work, and they didn't do that. And so Carmen took on those cases, as well as many others involving labor. So if you're interested in unions and work, I do encourage you to look more into so many things that you could do, including going to law school and becoming an employment lawyer.
Thank you. Moving on to our next question. What advice do you have about working across the aisle with someone who may disagree with to get the job done. So we're talking bipartisan, nonpartisan.
I think, it's super, most of my cases don't go to trial, which means that, we have cases that a lawsuit is filed and we go to court and then we almost always settle. That's just the way that civil practice works out. And so this is kind of similar to that, is when you're negotiating. And negotiations in general mean that someone gives something up, right? You have to meet somewhere in the middle. But while I agree with that and you have to do it, you really have to show up prepared. And so when I go to mediation, it's as if I'm going to trial. So I will compromise, but I am going to compromise as little as possible because I'm going to show you just how strong my case is and why it makes sense. So I think that, yes, definitely we need to talk to people, be as persuasive as possible and sometimes compromise, but you really cannot sell your clients out. You cannot sell out your constituents for the sake of a win, because then it's not really a win. And what you end up doing is that people lose faith in you and they lose faith in the system. And so to me, it's like we need to hone our skills when it comes to negotiations, instead of just throwing in the towel and saying this issue is too big or it's too complicated. And always, at least for me, because I have clients, I can't settle a case without their permission. So for me, it's the same thing. If you have voters, constituents, community members, they also need to be okay with what you're doing, right? You can't make decisions, especially behind closed doors, because then they don't have an input. And oftentimes, I have clients, that run the spectrum. Some of them are so reasonable and they're like, oh, okay, let's just do that. And I'm like, whoa, you have a really strong case. Like, you don't have to go away, or give up so much so early. Other clients are very unreasonable. And that's when I have to be persuasive towards them and talk about the weaknesses in our case and why this is a good outcome for them. And it's not always possible to settle. And that's something that you have to be comfortable as well, is that you may not be able to get permission from your constituents to compromise, and you have to keep fighting or wait until you have a more receptive opponent on the other side.
And what are some of the biases you have faced as a woman, and how did you overcome that?
I'm really lucky because so many women, like the women that I named, including my mom and my grandmother, my great-grandmother, grandmothers, dealt with so many things that were much more blatant, right? Not having access to education for some of them, not having access to the vote, not having access to employment, credit lines, so many things that my generation, I was born in 1976, I haven't had to deal with those things. The biases that I have dealt with are a lot more insidious. They're institutionalized and they're cultural. And so those are a lot harder, right? But they're there. And I saw them during the campaign. I saw people who, especially men who are older, be very condescending and say, well, mija, maybe next time you can win. Right now, and I'm like, look at my resume. Like, I've done so much work in the community. But it was just like this, we're not ready for you. We're not ready for a woman to lead. I think that if you look at like Gloria Steinem and you look at other feminist writers, like they'll tell you, like some people, especially men, but some women as well, just it's really difficult for them to see a woman in power. They're not comfortable with it. It's not normal for them. They also would rather have, a businessman in charge because that's what they're used to and that's what they feel that they can trust, even though that's not working for them. So one of the things, though, that I do see across the board is sexism by our mainstream media, especially our English language media. And I'll give you an example. If y'all know Duranguito, the woman there are two women who still remain in the neighborhood where the city wants to demolish and build a sports arena. And one of them is Antonia Flores Morales, Toñita. Toñita is incredibly intelligent and articulate. She only speaks Spanish, but she can synthesize an issue in a few sentences and really make her point. And she also understands economic development because she's lived in El Paso for over 60, 70 years, probably more than that, and has been told all kinds of promises. Like she holds the history of El Paso. She has never been on KBIA Extra, right? They have had debates between Mayor Margot and JP Bryan, the man who has funded a lot of the lawsuits against the city. They've had Max Grossman, who's a friend and who I respect a lot. Dr. Grossman has been on there on debates, but they've never asked her for her input. Not simply as someone who lives there as a tenant, but also as someone who has seen the development of our barrios and our downtown. And so that, I think that is still consistent, right? When we think about authorities and we think about who gets to speak for us, it's often a man. And it's often in El Paso, even a white man, even though our community, when we add people who are Black, Afro, Latinx, and Asian, we are almost 90%, if not more, of people of color. But our spokespeople are still not reflective of the majority of us. And so there's, I think, a lot of implicit bias that I've had to deal with. I've been in rooms with people where I'll say something and what I said is attributed to someone else. There are people who just will not listen to what I have to say. They have a filter on. And so if something resonates with them, their mind can't comprehend that I said it, and they have to give credit to someone else. So that's happened. And of course, like, you know, the problem or the beast is so, in some ways, so big that it's really hard to pinpoint. I can tell you when I started the campaign and I had small group settings, people would ask me like, well, what are you gonna do when someone says like, you don't have kids or you're not married, or they start questioning this or that? And I was like, I'm gonna say it's not relevant, but okay. And I think I have to say that when it came to the actual voters, when we were out talking to people, which was hard because of COVID, no one asked me about my marital status. Like, no one asked why my mailer didn't have a family portrait. People don't really care. Like at the end of the day, I think most voters really just care about what you're going to do for them. But again, I think that there is some implicit bias against women in certain positions. And if we look at women who run for judges, we do see that most women who run for judges against a man win. So there is some trust by the voters in women in positions of decision-making at that level in the courtroom, but not necessarily in political spaces, more political spaces like the mayor's office or like city council and others. Although we have seen a lot of improvement in those areas, we still haven't had we've only had one female mayor and no Chicanas or Latinx or Latinas who have actually won the mayor's position.
Thank you. And lastly, we'll just have one more question. If you could tell yourself, your 20-year-old self, a piece of advice, what would it be?
It would be, I've said this before in other spaces, find your people, find your tribe, and realize that it's going to change, right? And so I've been very lucky. I've been in different spaces, in college, in workspaces, in law school, and I have found my people, and they haven't always, remained with me because I've moved and things like that. But I think I'm very grateful for the fact that I have continuously gravitated towards people who sustain me and who make me better and who inform my decisions. And the campaign really helped me to connect with people like that. I think that's really important. I talk to a lot of high school kids, and some of them are incredible, but they can't find their footing in high school. They can't really find those friends who get them. And so they end up doing these things that are high risk or that are really soul crushing to them because they're trying to fit in. And so my advice to them is always like, just wait, it's going to get better. You're going to find friends who have a lot more things in common with you. Maybe, you know, once you go to college or once you start working in a certain project or field. And so don't do things right now that will compromise what you can do later, just based on the fact that maybe you're a little bit lonely, because that happens. But you will end up gravitating towards the people, and you're going to be able to manifest and bring people into your life that do encourage you. And I think sometimes in El Paso that can be very challenging. If you're a member of the LGBTQ community and you're in a family that's very conservative, or if you're a diehard environmentalist and everyone in your family wants to buy a big truck and has these very, has dreams that and ambitions that you think are counter to what is good for the environment, for instance. I think there's also a strong push for law enforcement and law enforcement jobs in our community. And for some of us, that's really hard, because if you care about immigrants' rights and you care about criminal justice, it's really difficult to be able to have conversations sometimes at home when you're dealing with that. And so that's why I think it's really healthy to find outlets for that, so that you do feel like you always have someone who has your back and who believes the same things that you do, because it can be soul crushing if you're not.
Ms. Vero, thank you once again for joining this session. Now we will move on to Raneem, who will take over from now on. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful stuff, Vero. Thank you so much. So again, for everyone who's joined, my name is Raneem Karboji. I was a co-founder of Ignite way back in the day, a couple of years ago. And I'm really happy to be here and a big fan of Vero. I helped out on her mayoral campaign, so I'm super excited to see her. And it's nonpartisan, so I can totally say that, right? So I was super happy. So I love that you touched on even high school, right? When we asked about your 20-year-old self, right? But on that note, we have a wonderful class president. She's a freshman at Franklin, Miss Michelle Jimenez, who'll be asking some of the questions that participants had submitted beforehand. And then if we have time, we'll go ahead and go through the questions on the chat. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. So our first question is, what are the mechanisms in place to increase, support, and facilitate the growth of women leaders in the 915 community?
What are the mechanisms right now? Ooh, I think, there are some organizations that are helpful. I didn't rely on them for different reasons, but I would encourage people to seek them out, like Annie's List and Emily's List. But I think locally, you are part of that structure now, right? And so I think that I'm part of some plans that are in the pipeline, but I think that if there is something that's really close to your heart and it's tied into a position, you need to run, and the help will come. Especially if you're part of a progressive community. I think that right now, a lot of progressives in El Paso are ready to support really good candidates. And so we have the school board elections are coming up in May 5th, I believe is the election day, or May 1st maybe, but they're coming up really quickly. And so people just announced, and now we're doing forums, and now many of us are getting involved directly with those campaigns. And so I'd say, I don't know that there is any kind of formal structure right now in El Paso to help candidates, but that's something that I'm working on actively, because a lot of what we did in our campaign was reinventing the wheel on purpose, because I didn't want to hire political consultants. I wanted to focus on making it really organic and creating a new model so that people don't feel like they have to take funny money or dirty money in order to fund a really good campaign and then target the same voters that everyone has been targeting for the last 10, 20 years, right? The idea for us was always to expand voter numbers and to make sure that people who are registered but don't vote are motivated to vote, and people who are not registered get registered and go out and vote. And so I think the mechanisms are being built, and I'm really happy to be a part of that. And I think we'll be announcing some things in the near future about an organization that we want to work with to start doing that.
Okay, thank you. Somebody asked, is there any data you can share regarding women running for office? I'd like to analyze it to help better understand the disconnect between a country that has a larger female population, but a minority of political leaders.
That's a really fantastic question. And I don't know offhand who would have that kind of data. I'm assuming that there are some political think tanks that have been looking at that, because it's really important for us to see. I love data, and data has become more and more accessible to us. But it can be a very great launching board for seeing bigger problems, right? So like I said before, El Paso in its 150-year history has had 4 Mexican-American male mayors, 1 female mayor, and 0 Chicanas, Latinas, African-American female mayors, and no African-American mayors at all. But in terms of women, only 1, and that's it. And so I have seen some media coverage, and maybe that's a good place to start, to see how many mayors in the country are female and how many of them are women of color. And then looking at different positions, right? Like county judges, county commissioners, city council, the state legislatures are really, really important. I cannot emphasize that enough. We need to have really good state legislators, because they decide so many things in Texas, as you know.
Okay, and then thank you for your answer. And the next question is, what was your very first position with the city of El Paso?
So I've never worked with the city, and I've never run for office before. And so I have worked with them on different projects, including, doing things with fair housing, like trainings on discrimination in housing. I've also I did help with the implementation of the housing programs, which, we're not 100% on, but for COVID. And so I do work with the city a lot as part of my job. So going back to the question about compromise, you have to be able to play nice with people. Even if you're suing them on other issues, you also have to have some space to show them grace and to be able to collaborate and do what's best for the community on different issues.
Okay, and how is your career as an attorney?
It is very challenging, but it can be very rewarding, and it just depends on the kind of practice that you end up doing. So when we think about practices, what we're talking about is your area of expertise, right? So there are attorneys who work on family law, like divorces, others that work on environmental issues, others that work on criminal defense. There's just so many things that you can do. And with the law, your personality can also dictate the kind of work that you do. Some attorneys only look at contracts and documents all day, every day. That's what they like to do. They don't like going to court. Other attorneys like working with people a lot. So they do mostly community type of education and outreach, and not a lot of litigation. So it just depends on what you want to do. I think I've been very lucky to work at a place like Legal Aid, because we're part of a union, and we're also given a lot of freedom in terms of taking cases that affect our client community. Most lawyers who are working privately have to worry about paying the bills. And so they don't always have the luxury of taking cases that they're passionate about. And I get to do that. So that's been a huge, huge blessing in my life. And I may not do it forever, but I'm certainly grateful that I've done it for this long.
Okay. And now, what issues do you consider most critical for El Paso now? What steps do you consider most essential in addressing those issues?
Oh my gosh, that's, I think the environment is a huge issue. And if I go back a little bit to the things that I think are really important, the thing with El Paso is that so much of what we can and can't do is dictated by the state of Texas. And the things that we deal with are a consequence of state rules primarily, or the state implementation of federal rules. So what bothers me the most, if I have to be honest, and I think the biggest issue that I can identify is campaign financing. If we look even at the storm that happened in the rest of Texas a couple of weeks ago, the first thing that our governor said was this was the fault of the wind renewable energy, right? It was not the naturally gas powered plants, it was the renewables. If you look at his campaign financing, $26 million came from the oil and gas industry. So he has a conflict of interest, right? He's not going to look for the truth. The truth was that the wind farms and the solar panels didn't do as badly as predicted, and they weren't prepared. Like they were kind of set up to fail in a situation like this. But the real culprit here was natural gas, not only because of the way that it failed during the freezing weather, but the fact that we know that natural gas is a huge contributor to the climate crisis and to us having unseasonable weather, like a 7-day winter storm in the rest of Texas. So he's never going to say that because he can't. So much of his money comes from that, right? So when we start to really unpackage, like, what's the biggest issue, I think that almost all of those issues go back to campaign finance reform. At the federal level, when we talk about Medicare for all and health insurance for everyone, we also have to look at who is financing the people who end up passing these bills or saying no to these bills. And it's the pharmaceutical industry, it's the private hospitals. There's so many people who are bought, when they take office, they already have a debt to pay back to their donors. And so to me, that's the biggest issue because it affects all the issues that are really close to my heart, like the environment, like immigration, like education, women's rights. So many of those things are tied back to the fact that our elected leaders are already in the pocket of someone else who has a benefit. Even if we look at things like, the minimum wage and really programs that even criminal justice reform, right? The fact is that a lot of our prisons are privately run. Our immigration detention centers are privately run. So someone is making money off of decisions that are made by politicians. And so that's why, all the things that are close to my heart and probably close to your heart really go back to someone having made a decision to take dirty money from the beginning of their campaign.
Okay, well, thank you so much for answering the questions. Raneem?
Yes, thank you again, Vero. We did get a couple questions on the chat. Unfortunately, out of respect for everyone's time, of course, for your time, Vero, we're going to go ahead and start closing out. But we did want to thank you again. We're so honored that you took the time to hang out with us. Not only you on the call, but so many local legends, Dr. Stout, Carol, Judy, Marilyn. Super fortunate to have everyone here. For those that are coming as part of a class or it's your first experience with Ignite, we encourage you to return and join us in the meetings. Having local legends on is just one of our things that we do. So it's really amazing. We get to learn so much, and thank you for spending your time with us again. It's been so beneficial, enriching, inspiring, and I have like 5 questions myself that I want to ask you, but hopefully at a later time. And I super duper look forward to whatever announcements you're going to come out with soon with the organization that you're working with or whatever comes your way. But thank you so much again for spending your time with us. Malea?
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just want to say a quick shout out to all of our moderators. You guys are incredible. It's such an honor to be serving as the president of Ignite and have you wonderful members. And to Michelle, you did amazing. I can't believe you're in high school and that you're a freshman. That's crazy. I wish I had your confidence when I was a freshman in high school. And thank you so much to Vero. We absolutely love you and we're honored to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun, and I'm sorry I gave you really long answers to a lot of the questions, but I am really excited about the work that you're doing and extremely supportive of everything that y'all are doing. And like I said, I've said this before, I didn't run for myself, I ran for my community, and that includes candidates. And I see in front of me a lot of I think we're all women who are more than ready to run and more than ready to make some incredible changes to this community that has been so neglected and so misappropriated. And so I am excited about supporting your future campaigns, and keeping and just working with you in many different ways moving forward. So thank you for everything that you do and for organizing and for, for being interested in politics, because so many of the things that we love are tied to decisions that are made by those that are in power.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those kind words. So we will be closing out, you guys, and there were so many great questions. This has honestly never happened where we can't get through all the questions, even the ones that we had planned. So I will contact Vero and work on a way where maybe we can follow up and get some of those questions answered, if that's okay with you, Vero. And yeah, I just wanted to give a quick shout out again. If you need to leave, thank you for being here. We want to be respectful of y'all's time. But I do want to give Naomi the floor for a few minutes. She is our faculty advisor at UTEP, our sponsor. We're so thankful for her. And so Naomi, I'll give you the floor.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Vero, for your time. It's such an inspiration to get to listen to you and to think about the impact you've had on all of these amazing students who are here. I just want to invite everyone to join us next week at the Women and Gender Studies History Month Conference, which is happening virtually on March 9th and 10th. I put the registration link in the chat, and we have a number of live events and a number of pre-recorded panels and presentations that will be up on the website, which you'll have access to once you register. Everything is free, and the first event that will be happening on March 9th is a Valiant Women of the Vote keynote that will be moderated by Angela Cacherga, and it's a conversation between Veronica Escobar and Sylvia Garcia. It's at 2 p.m. And we hope to see all of you there. So please register and send me an email. You can DM me in the chat right now if you have questions, and see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Naomi. I am gonna go ahead and stop the recording now.